I think the biggest other source of bullishness, which is insane and like hard to price in because of how significant it would be, is the Bitcoin reserve, right? If that's even a slight probability, then like everyone else kind of needs to front run it. And so it's hard to see a world where we're not just kind of going up for a while.
Now we can finally see if this industry can come up with anything besides number go up technology and number stay flat technology. Like Bitcoin and stablecoins seem to be the two things that have product market fit and that we've made. I think a lot of us in the industry have used the regulatory environment as our main reasoning for why there haven't been more mainstream consumer apps. And so this is kind of now, these next 4 years are kind of the place to prove it and see if that's true or if it'll always just be a giant casino.
Nothing said on the Hivemind is a recommendation to buy or sell securities or tokens. This podcast is strictly for informational purposes only, and any views expressed by anyone on the show are solely our own opinions, not financial advice.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Hivemind podcast. Today with us, we have our usual crew, Ceteris, Duncan, Jan, and myself, Jose. So we're recording here on November the 7th. We're so back. Trump has won the election with a clean sweep. I'm going to hand it over to our resident American on the podcast, Jan, to cover what that means. And then we're going to have a fun podcast just discussing what all this means for crypto, who the biggest winners and losers are, what crypto policies we're potentially most excited for, etc. But Jan, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, no, great day for crypto. I think this outcome, if you were following things, was pretty obvious. I think the markets had him at a decent favorite, and you know, if you kind of just think about the shift of the voter base and you know, where people were 4 years ago, it was pretty clear that he was in a good position to win, pending, you know, shenanigans and a bunch of other stuff. But so the end result is that we have a Trump victory, and then in addition, you have you know, sweeps across the House and the Senate. So previously, the Senate was blue and the House was red, and basically, in scenarios where it's split, it becomes a bit more difficult to pass legislation. And so, you know, thinking about what the benefits of the sweep are, you have, so with a Senate that's aligned with the president, it's much easier to pass legislation. It's much easier to make appointments, you know, whether it's judges, people to your cabinet, kind of a lot of the elements that are really needed to allow for the president to kind of implement the policies he wants to do. And so it's not often that you have this kind of alignment. I think the last time you had a super majority, which is what we have here, is Obama, and he passed Obamacare. And so the super majority is basically you have 60 Senate out of the 100 instead of at least 50, which then you get to pass much more kind of larger scale kind of legislation, which Obamacare was. But here, you know, you have an environment where there should be the ability to create a lot more friendly regulation towards crypto. And then I think in particular, we saw quite a few crypto friendly people coming into office across both the House and the Senate, which is really bullish. I think the specific number was, Stand With Crypto has a thing. So yeah, 260 out of the House of Representatives, like 263 pro, 116 against. And then in the Senate, this is not total, this is just newly elected, right? So you had 263 pro, 116 anti. And then in the Senate, you had 18 pro, 12 anti. And then the Senate went from being kind of 49, 51, 51 blue, 49 red. It's currently 52, but it might be as high as 54, 55, depending on kind of how some of these last elections shake out. And so, yeah, it really kind of creates the environment for a lot of optimism around the space. I think, you know, you had the previous big moment, which was it became and no longer a kind of career risk to invest in the space, um, where it became consensus, and now you still have that tailwind, of course, and then now you have the regulatory side where ideally we see an influx on the builder front. And so, thinking about what happens next, um, Trump's talked about trying to looking to fire Gensler on day one. It's unfortunately not as straightforward as that, where he technically doesn't have the ability to fire him. Like the Gensler has a term, and have heard rumors that he's realizes that his future path in politics isn't really there anymore, right, under this current administration, and so he's kind of going scorched earth potentially, and trying to burn things down. But I think it's going to have much less teeth now with kind of how much of a reversal we're going to see, um, in terms of the approach from the government towards like a reversal in the hostility. So the way you can get rid of him. So typically the incumbent leaves with every new administration, because it's just like time for them to appoint someone that they want, and so that's kind of historically happened here. But like that was based on the chairman's doing, not a function of the government removing him. So it is kind of up to them. There are legislative paths that can be taken to kind of get rid of him, and so I think with all of the branches of government aligned, those should be easier. And ideally, he kind of just doesn't make this a drawn out process for his sake. But yeah, it seems like this is the ultimate kind of catalyst from a market that was previously super hostile towards crypto. And aside from the Gensler element, I think the biggest other source of bullishness, which is insane and like hard to price in because of how significant it would be, is the Bitcoin reserve, right? If something like that happens, then like I think the numbers floated around was like 1 million BTC over a couple of years, and if you do the math on what that needs to be on like a daily basis, it's basically just like an infinite bid. And so the game theory in terms of if that's even a slight probability, then like everyone else kind of needs to front run it. And so it's hard to see a world where we're not just kind of going up for a while. Obviously, there's going to be chop as people get ahead of their skis periodically, but yeah, it seems like we're as back as we could be.
I think we're going from sideways chop to upwards chop, and yeah, it's basically like fastest horse season, where you get angry if you're not on the fastest horse. Yeah, it's hard to see like any downside. Like I'm talking like for crypto from this outcome. The only thing maybe is like I've been reading a bunch that like interest rate cut expectations now with Trump are like kind of cooled off a bit. So you can maybe see that as like the one negative, but like all the other factors are just like way overpower it, that I don't even think you have to worry about. Like you have to really think about that at this point. Um Personally, like obviously BTC did well. I kind of tweeted this yesterday. Like I think yesterday kind of made sense for like an ETH BTC bottom. Um, I think that you will probably now see a lot of capital come into non BTC stuff because the regulatory hostility or ceiling, whatever you want to call it, seems like it's going to be lifted in a pretty big way now. And so I mean, we haven't really seen it yet. We still had like no ETF flows yesterday and like the day before. But I think that this kind of makes sense. Like right now, it's all crypto capital that's kind of been moving ETH over the last day or two. Um, but I do think this could kind of be the catalyst to start to see like those ETH ETFs start to get flows now, and then that kind of trickles down to like everything non BTC, right? It trickles down to like DeFi stuff, trickles down to other L1s. It just so maybe like BTC dominance tops on like around Trump presidency. I like the win. I don't know how people feel about that.
I
Yeah, it
think
depends on the reserve, probably, right? Like it's hard to see if it.
Yeah. But even still, that's not coming for a few months.
But like, what would the reserve? Like, so if you're like the reserve's so ludicrous.
Yeah,
Like, that would be actually absurd. So, like, you said there's Polymarket and all that. Like, what is the like? Does anyone actually know what if that's even a real possibility?
Yeah, the reserve would be cool.
Okay, the
I guess
Polymarket
BTC benefits
odds
the least from
on
presidency.
no volume. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's no
there's like no
volume.
liquidity. It's 27%, but there's no liquidity, so you can't use that number for anything.
That seems high.
That seems way
yeah,
too high, yeah.
yeah.
But I mean, I don't know. Let's talk about. I mean, the reserve, whatever. There's not much to say about the reserve.
Well, the
Let's.
reserve would be insane,
Yeah, but
but
I mean, there's not like
I think
sure.
firing Gary Gensler and putting in like Hester Pierce would be like insane
I
as
don't think
well.
she wants it though.
You know, is that
But I
right?
think, yeah. I've heard the what's that other guy
Mark
Ueda?
Uyeda,
Yeah,
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 he's
him. And then the other one floating around was Robin Hood's chief legal officer. That was floating around for like a few months now, which would also be like a good win. I think one thing I'll say with this is like now we can finally see if this industry can come up with anything besides number go up technology and number stay flat technology. Like Bitcoin and stablecoins seem to be the two things that have product market fit and that we've made. I think a lot of us in the industry have used the regulatory environment as our main reasoning for why there haven't been more mainstream consumer apps. And so this is kind of now these next 4 years are kind of the place to prove it and see if that's true or if it'll always just be a giant casino, right? Um, so I think while everybody is happy now and excited and yeah, bullish on prices, um, I do really hope we start to see some cool stuff come out of
yeah.
this.
I think you kind of get it in waves, right? So initially the repricing happens, I think, on DeFi, but I'm not super optimistic that that rally has a lot of legs because like it's what is it solving for? It's removing downside risk, right? But upside um, price discovery is still going to be a function of fundamentals, and so I think on a lot of these protocols, it's hard to rationalize a lot more upside. So I guess like they do reprice because part of that the current price factored in regulatory action and some you know uh, big kind of negative surprise. But I think the like you mentioned, the more optimistic and longer term tailwinds are builders coming into place and actually being comfortable doing that. But
yeah, like not being afraid of getting arrested.
well, I think there's the current framework, and so without Gensler, there's less concerns around regulation by enforcement and kind of unknown punitive actions. But there still really isn't a framework for building, right? So you kind of almost need that domino to fall before people get too comfortable. But at the same time, you could really build and not launch a token, and then once there's clarity on the token side, you can do that. So it shouldn't be cause too much of a delay. It's more delaying on the token side, I'd say, but ideally,
there's a lot of right now. It's just speculation, right? You would need like some of the anti-money laundering regs to change, like definitely the security stuff, like having a framework for how to launch a token, how to do distributions, how to raise money with a token. All this stuff would be really helpful. I do think there's some DeFi projects that really benefit from this, especially if there's like good stablecoin regulations, which is something that's been talked about a lot, where they can be used as legal tender. It clarifies like the tax treatment and all this kind of thing.
Jose's hoping
Um,
for Athena legal tender.
yes, USD legal tender. Well, you've already seen Athena turn on the fee switch, right? Or like a proposal from Wintermute to turn on the fee switch yesterday, and I think you're going to see a lot more of that soon. And that's one of the most cash flow generating DeFi projects plus a stablecoin. I think it really benefits from this regulatory regime and from the just animal spirits in general returning to the market and funding going up. Um, any others that you guys think actually really do benefit from this, and I guess within like DeFi for now.
I mean, they all kind of reprice, right? Immediately higher, like Uni, Aave, all of them.
Lido, like the ones that
Yeah.
got notices and stuff. Yeah, it definitely allows a path for like these tokens not to just be forever useless anymore, which was kind of what it felt like before. But then as Jan said, right, it's like doesn't necessarily mean that all of a sudden their fundamentals are going to like improve out of nowhere. But like we know, all this stuff is super reflexive. So if ETH does bottom and starts going up again, then like it's gonna bring the fundamentals of all these things up with it. Um, yeah, so I definitely think DeFi. I think what's probably the most interesting one would be like RWA. I think could get really interesting. Like if they say like, okay, we want to have like Apple stock on chain or something, and like you could bring on like an insane amount of capital, like tokenizing, a lot of existing like venture funds or private equity funds, putting stocks on chain, then like putting those into like an Aave type thing, we can get liquidity on them. Like that's where I think things, and obviously that's years out with regulation, but you know with like the balance of power how it is, I don't think that's like a non-zero chance by in the next 4 years. And that's when things can get really crazy because you're bringing like so much capital and so much liquidity on chain and unlocking so much of it and allowing borrowing on it. That should just like really bring everything up with it. And I think that like the only real chance that has happened if you had like a kind of Republican sweep or like very pro crypto sweep. So I feel like long term that could be really cool. Um, and then obviously like positive DeFi in the short term, and then like memes still probably do well. I feel like
I
they've
mean, the AI stuff though too. Like
Yeah.
the AI, it seems like AI has also been facing a lot of potential like regulatory headwinds from the big like closed sourced Web2 companies, and it seems like not open AI, like open AI, like open sourced AI, and like decentralized AI might actually be a pretty big winner from
Maybe.
this too. And
There's speculation that he'll repeal the executive order, the Biden executive order immediately. And on open source AI, yeah, like JD Vance has spoken out for it, and obviously
wait,
Elon,
what was the executive order just for context?
the just like over regulation on AI companies, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, it started off and then it got expanded to more things, but yeah, it was pretty universally sort of. I mean, actually, Elon ended up endorsing it by the end of it. He was initially pretty against it, but yeah, the speculation that Trump will repeal that straight away and go into more of like a deregulated AI. He also wants to like really encourage uh, sort of GPU farms and energy and stuff to be produced in the US. He's really big on that, obviously, which would be pretty bullish. He also said rightly he wanted Bitcoin to be produced in the US.
Yeah. That's one of the non-speculative policies he'll not like is in a policy that we're pretty confident he'll implement, right? Is some kind of friendly, whether it's tax structures or whatever it is, to get more mining done here. And I think just overall, part of his um, campaign has been kind of increasing energy production in the U.S., which is incredibly necessary.
Yeah. What do we think on like memes versus, I guess, like VC coins or fundamentals coins here? Like, seems like if there's proper regulation, memes like part of the reason for memes should disappear. Or like some people mentioned memes was because you couldn't in a regulatorily compliant way do proper coins with cash flows and stuff like this. Do we think that's the case?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the sources of FUD. The other is just the fact that you have unlocks on you, and then valuing VC tokens on a fundamental basis on top of the fact that there are people unlocking on you makes it harder to bid. I think the positioning on some of these is probably negative enough that they'll have a pump where people need to unwind. I think that's also like part of the ETH narrative is that it's used as a kind of a pair trade for a lot of stuff, and so there's kind of unwinds that need to happen there. So I think
Yeah, you
positioning
bought some
wise,
ETH
some of them.
recently, right? Is it
Yeah,
just
but
a positioning trade
yes.
or?
I mean, I'm
Weren't you
hoping
already
for
long ETH, or you just
not
added?
really. I had like very little spot ETH. I just bought a bunch of perps yesterday, basically. Um, if this isn't the time for it to move a little bit, then it's going to be hard to see when it will.
Yeah, on meme coins first. I don't know if I think they're gonna get crazier. To be completely honest, people like them, and I think the unlock thing is more important. Like we talk about turning on these fee switches and stuff, and sure, there'll be maybe a couple tokens where the fee switch is enticing, but people are going to get bored of that pretty quickly when they're staking their DeFi token and getting a 0.5% yield. They're going to get like pretty bored of that pretty quickly.
I definitely think you need to like differentiate on the like low float high FTV tokens, like you said, Jose. It's like there's some that are like literally vapor, have no business, and launch at ridiculous valuations. Maybe those have pumps, but like I
Well,
think
like does the fundraising method change too now, right? Which kind of helps solve a lot of that low circ high FTV stuff, right? Or will we be able to do
ICOs.
get a bigger
What?
ICOs, get a bigger portion of like
So
circulating supply
everyone's unlocked, or
earlier?
like, why does the fundraising? How do
No, I'm
you know,
just
fundraising method solving the low float high FTV means you're just unlocking everyone right away?
I
no, I think you can get like you can do like a raise to public like right before you launch, maybe at like a lower
Yeah, I
value
think
launch
you.
before.
I think
something lower.
So everyone's unlocked though. Is the thing?
Well, no, or you just
Yeah.
launch lower.
No, I think on the public raise, everyone can be unlocked. I mean, I think there's many parts to it. First one is you tap into more capital. Should lead to like. Um,
There hasn't really been a shortage of that though.
I mean, there's going to be more capital if you can involve retail and stuff as well into earlier stage. I just think it mainly disrupts that last round the projects do right before they go public, where it's like the mega funds that take it at like a place where they think it can 2 or 3x potentially, and then you just do that as an ICO instead. You'll be able to get a better valuation. You can like unlock everyone in the ICO, get some float out there that way. Because I just think it's way easier to get float out with an ICO is kind of the main thing, like because you're not giving people tokens with a zero cost basis. You're actually making them pay for them, and it's just a way better way to get float out
Yeah.
Yeah,
there.
but but like we're talking about ICOs in the last round. Like the first rounds are they are as they are in this situation. If we're just talking about like, so I mean, those either are locked up or they're not, and they're low cost. I mean, it's like there isn't really that much of a difference of if you're like doing the IC. So if you're doing a round at whatever 400 million and you do it private versus an ICO round, in the end, if you're doing it private and locked, or private and unlocked, or ICO and unlocked, it's kind of the same thing. I'd say if anything, ICO peeps probably have more paper hands than some of these
Yeah, I
funds.
think it's more of a change into like, okay, there's definitely like a few different things we're talking about, but I think it's more of a change in like what you actually launch it at. You do that round at 400 million with ICO people, and then you launch at like, a billion or something versus launching at 10 billion.
ICOs just means there's because you can sell unlocked tokens, so you have proper public market price discovery in the ICO. Especially if you have something like an auction and you're selling a meaningful portion of supply, like 10+%, then you don't have this issue of price discovery needs to wait like 2 years until there's enough float unlocked that you can actually price this thing. Like you,
But
you actually
yeah,
have
so
price
what? But
discovery
if
up
you
front.
unlocked all the private investors on the launch of the token, right? Isn't that effectively accomplishing the same thing? You get more supply unlocked, price discovery. It's just like public's dumping versus investors dumping, but in the end, it's still same price discovery, same supply unlocked.
Yeah, but I feel like that's like frowned upon. Like the
Oh,
current
for
meta
sure,
right
I
now
agree. I'm
is
just saying,
like,
like in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, then like you
yeah,
can effectively do that just
I
unlocking the
still
last
think
round.
private market price discovery is different from public market price discovery, to be honest.
Okay, I
But
think
yeah.
though, I
Yeah,
think
I'd agree.
that the big takeaway from the fundraising and what really matters is that more money is going to start going to applications, right? Because infra has kind of been seen. I think everyone is sick of infra funding now. We have like a ton of infra. And infra was always seen as not only from a builder perspective as like a low risk way to make a lot of money, also from a VC perspective, right? If you're just building like generalized infra, you're probably not going to get caught up in, like more of these money laundering or other laws. And so it was seen from both a builder and investor perspective as like the safe thing to do. And now with the poor performance of the infra tokens, with the regulatory environment changing, I've even seen on Twitter, even before the election, it seemed like there was kind of a vibe shift of more funding towards apps. And so I think that will be kind of the main driving force now going forward. And applications also just naturally launch at much lower valuations too, than infra. And so I think that could be the main uh, takeaway moving forward, which
I also
is
think,
good.
yeah, I agree, and I think there's a lot of benefits to the ICO thing. I think another one that it can have is that if one of these primary platforms, and we're obviously like investors in Incubated Legion, which is one of the main ones here, but there's also Echo. If any of these get significant traction, they could replace like the centralized exchange, or at least like supplement the centralized exchanges in terms of getting users, because like a lot of the centralized exchange listing thing is just the way that you go to market in crypto for better or for worse. And I think if these primary platforms start doing well, that's where early stage retail will go for alpha rather than going on Binance and buying the high float low FTV. And then you can replace a lot, because I think a lot of the stuff that happens with low float high FTV and the infra bias and stuff is actually like centralized exchanges are driving it, because they historically have had a preference for infra. They like encourage these Discord games to get loads of users and stuff like this. The high float low FTV sort of benefits them, like notional volumes are higher, and there's like all sorts of ways in which they're the primary beneficiaries of this. And so I don't know. I think there's a lot of ways that if ICOs come back, sort of a lot of things get better
I
for
think
the
exchanges
industry.
definitely aren't the primary beneficiaries of it. It's definitely the teams and the investors. Like the
Team
exchanges are just
investors
like,
don't get to sell. They're just
I
locked.
know,
Like
but even if it goes down 90%, or like, people who, what's the initial float usually? Like from an airdrop or
Usually like
from,
5 to 7.
yeah, like from
I'd say.
airdrop, or usually is what it comes from. So like, I feel like, even some teams maliciously
airdrop
can
and
like,
market makers.
and yeah, market makers like farm their own airdrops, have those agreements. Even if it goes down, I think you need to differentiate between like, projects that like literally have no path to being worth this, and then, projects that still did the high FTV low float thing but have a product like something like Athena, which like it's still launched at like a high FTV low float, but it does have like a good product. I think the buckets and the projects in the first bucket where like they are never have a chance of making this money and are down only, are probably still going to have some pumps but are done. And then, something like Athena that actually has a project who did this has way more of a chance because they actually have a real product and the regulatory environment has shifted. In terms of like, yeah, capital raising in the future, I definitely think things like Legion, Echo, I think Hyperliquid's probably going to do stuff like that as well. But I think it's kind of on the teams more so than the exchanges. Like I don't think Binance likes it. That's why they're taking. I think Ceteris, you linked a tweet from Thinking USD in the chat, but why they're asking for so much of the supply.
Binance is a huge beneficiary of this. Like there's so many ways in which they benefit from this. Like one of the big ones is just the launch pool. Like
Yeah,
but
yeah, they're asking for 10% of the supply because they know that these things are going down
they're the ones
90%.
getting the supply at the high FDV and selling to people. Like they're fully unlocked. Like the BNB stakers who are getting, like if you look at BNB yield over the last 2 years, I saw a tweet on this, like 50 to 60%, just because you're getting like the INAs, the everything who launched, like everything which launched on the launch pool.
That's why it's always trading with negative funding too, is because everyone's just like delta neutral BNB and just collecting that yield.
Yeah. And so like they bet like their stakers benefit loads, right? Like CZ, they're the ones dumping these tokens at the top. They benefit from like notional higher trading volumes. They become the only place that you can do like price discovery and just launch a token. Like I think there's loads of, and the teams and investors, like investors are just locked until the cliff, which is the most telegraphed event of all time. Like investors really don't benefit from this at all, other than if you think there's some anchoring to the launch price, and then it's like psychological anchoring to the launch price.
There's also two separate users though. Like I think, we're talking about the uh like what Legion would unlock doesn't completely cannibalize what Binance does, because it's still the primary venue to get massive volume, right? Like it's still the place you want to be to get a bunch of liquidity. I think this can compete in terms of, getting some retail in, but it's not necessarily going to replace Binance's bread and butter, which is, having a bunch of users and having a bunch of liquidity.
Yeah, I just have a question for Jose on this. Like, who actually decides? Is like, wouldn't it be the exchange, the team, and the market maker come together and decide what they want the launch price to be, or who's actually deciding
I don't think the launch price matters much. It
for
Yeah.
the low float high FTV coins? It definitely
There's just one
matters.
tick. There's like one tick at the launch price. Yeah.
Okay,
And
fine.
then
The price that it's in for the first 48 hours, like
it's just the market.
it's
market
not just
plus,
the market.
like,
Who's
well, I
buying
mean,
it at 20 billion? Just idiots?
No, well, it's a couple things. So it also depends on kind of the strike prices that the market makers contracts have set up, right? They typically end up
I
trying
feel
to
like
defend
that's
those a
a
bit.
better answer
So,
than just so.
but like it is just like animal spirits to some degree, though. There's only so much volume and liquidity the market maker can control.
Yeah, I just think that like it's definitely like there's definitely some like the teams, the market makers, and the exchange all have to take some responsibility versus being like, oh, this is just the market. This is the market price.
But you like the only way to get more float out there would just be to do bigger airdrops, and like you don't want to give away 10% of
No.
your supply to
Or
like test
doing,
that.
or the fundraising thing. You do the massive ICO, or like you sell
But
like a
it's just really
third.
hard to do that right now,
Yeah.
and
So
you're
that's how
attracting.
like changing things in the future could be good for
Agreed.
these projects.
In the end, though, I think, if you think about it, if you think about what the project is giving up in terms of the amount of tokens in a silo, it sounds like a lot, but you kind of have to think about it as like, what are the alternatives, right? Trying to do DEX only liquidity, you're never going to get nearly as liquid, and it's going to end up costing you a lot of tokens and incentives, right? So I think it's more they're doing it from a position of power, but as in the centralized exchanges are, but the alternative isn't great. And so in the end, it's still kind of the best path to getting your token as out there as possible. Because like price is a form of marketing, right? And so you can even try and like cope your way into justifying it as like good marketing spend too.
Yeah, and I definitely think that just like having more tokens on launch, so like you could just run, more seasons, more points, like have more transparency around that and get to a point where it's actually a healthy amount of tokens trading. Because like how many times do you have to see the same chart pattern of these things just launching and getting completely wrecked? And then I think anyone who bought on the launch, who was like initially a supporter, excited to buy, excited about the project, just gets insta wrecked. And it's just really not the optimal way to move forward, because it's just really retail and like the people genuinely excited about the project who end up getting screwed.
Yeah. To play devil's advocate, I guess if you're thinking about, project launch and then where the project is in 2 years, do you think the project will be better off if it releases a bunch of the tokens early so the chart doesn't like rip higher and then kind of melt down? Or do you think the project is better off if it, distributes some and then leaves a bunch for ammo to grow the business, grow, like uses incentives? I still think that in the end, 2 years later, the project is fundamentally in a stronger place, doing something more low float and then using the token as an incentive mechanism rather
Yeah,
than.
and that's how you have to like break it down depending on which project, right? Because we're kind of bucketing them all, and I think like there's ones that are clearly like these things are never going to be worth remotely close on any fundamental basis to what they launch at, and then there's ones that's launched super expensive, but they have a really interesting product, and like in a couple of years maybe they could get there if crypto like grows a lot and they grow a lot. So it's kind of hard to say,
Yeah.
but in general,
All right. I think we're getting sidetracked on this
Yeah.
project launch discussion. To bring it back, do we want to talk about Polymarket? That's something that it's an interesting one. What do you think? Like, it's clearly a big winner from this election cycle. I think they did like 600 million on election day or volume, something like
I
that.
think it was just a big win for like crypto too, because first of all, the
And
fact that
Polygon?
the fact that like Polymarket was 60-40 for a while, even if Harris turned out to be right, it's not that like Polymarket was necessarily like technically wrong, right? Because it's like, 6 out of 10, 4 out of 10 times you would expect it to be Harris anyways. So I think there's a lot of confusion just overall with like polls versus prediction market the whole time. But I mean, like my dad was talking to me about Polymarket. He's never talked to me about really any of this stuff except for he like watches some prices. I had other friends like talking about Polymarket when the election was on. That's what I was looking at the whole time in real time, right? I was looking at Polymarket in Kalshi and seeing like when they started spiking. And I was watching CNN the whole time too. And it was just funny how different it was. How like on CNN, they made it seem like it was a close race the whole time when it was like not. And the Polymarket kind of sniffed that out. I thought the story of what this French trader did was kind of cool. He commissioned like private neighbor method type polls, which I saw Robin Hansen, who's like the Futurarchy um, inventor, respond to this and say how like this is a method that's been around for a long time. So he's kind of surprising that it worked. So maybe he's lucky that this like just kind of like worked for him. But I mean, that's like
Yeah, that
that's
was
why
pretty
prediction,
cool.
but that's why prediction markets are. That's why they're cool, right? Because it's surfacing,
More information.
alpha. It's surfacing more
Yeah.
information, and people will call it like manipulation or whatever they thought it was. But this was literally a guy running private polling, and having the conviction to put what seemed like was the majority of his net worth down onto this. Um,
So
so
wild.
such a wild story, but I think it's
It's
amazing
about
for crypto
Bitcoin.
because there's like I saw Tarun tweet this too, how like Polymarket could have the moneymaker effect. And the moneymaker effect was this normal dude, he was an accountant, like 27 years old, and he won like big poker stars tournament, and then everybody got into like poker after that, right? Because everybody saw you could kind of make it like this. And like I don't know if this is going to get people coming into prediction markets or it's just going to get them like coming into crypto and stuff, but like yeah, and seeing Shane on CNBC today talking with all those guys, it's definitely like it's great to see a crypto app win the mainstream,
Yeah.
for something as important as like the election.
Well, it's super important because like it's also the most objective way to get probabilities on it, right? Like if you're hearing from CNN and networks, they have their own biases that they're embedding on these outcomes, and then the public polls aren't really accurate because the business is just to get the poll out rather than be accurate. There's like a handful that do well, but this is like truly the one global synthesized opinion on how this outcome plays out. I think the other conflation is like polls aren't showing probabilities, right? Polls are just showing that they think 52% of the voters are going to vote. But like poll and probabilities doesn't map 1-to-1. Like if the polls were 60-40, the poly market would be like 85-15 or something like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see because historically I feel like this is Polymarket's big thing, and then the volumes just disappear. And even like I'm scrolling through there now, like there's not a ton of relative to
The
the
Super Bowl,
election.
the Super Bowl, I think is pretty big.
Yeah, no, that's like I think the next one that I've seen that's the highest, but like the rest are pretty liquid. So it'd be really cool if they build out more. And what I think, now that there's more favorable regulation, if they do a token and like could help, bootstrap some markets that way, like help liquidity providers, maybe they could grow this into a bigger thing. So that could be a bull case, but it is really cool. Like, because with that guy Freddie had the chance, he bet 40 million on Trump, had the chance to make 20 million because he had that opportunity. Then he went and conducted all these private polls, and without Polymarket, that just doesn't exist. So you could think of applying that to like any question that is posed there with with deep enough liquidity. So like I don't know, something kind of cool could be like I just have to
And
find
also not just that, right? It'll surface like the insiders, like the people who have privileged information
Yeah, it just
it'll
services like
surface
its
those
actual
bets.
signal.
The structural headwind they still have, though, is that liquidity is really difficult to get because it's not
Yeah.
there aren't other offsetting markets that you can provide. You can't provide liquidity here and then as a market maker hedge yourself in another market because this is the market. So, market making on crypto pairs is easy because you can, balance yourself out, and so you can transfer liquidity from one venue to another effectively. Whereas here it's kind of impossible because there's no other place to hedge. So market making becomes very expensive.
Okay, Jan, hear me out. They do a V curve model where you have like gauges, and then people who want to figure out answers to certain questions put up a Polymarket and then direct emissions there to create liquidity on the market.
I like it. I mean, you could definitely charge a bunch in fees, right? Because it's you don't get to do this elsewhere. So like, it's not this fee race to the bottom. You can get like somewhat extractive.
The main thing is there's been no markets that have been interesting on any prediction market other than elections. Like they historically always their volume peaks right before elections and then trails off. And this is going back to like 2000. Or yeah, I think that was the first one.
Because that's just like the most like that has a critical mass for enough liquidity to it actually be interesting and people care about it. But like
Yeah.
if you were to build it out more, there's people who care about like certain niches and segments of markets a
But
lot.
you need both sides to care. That's the, you need like a market that, you know, two sides really passionately care about. Like, you know.
Yeah, and that exists, but they're just smaller, right? Like on the election, it's like the entire world's watching the US election. Like you couldn't have something that people care about more.
There's also alternatives for sports betting. There's sports books which are going to be more liquid, more efficient on pricing usually. Um, and then like I guess on like interest rate bets, there's Fed funds futures that people can speculate on, which you can do in size. So it's also thinking about like what competition they have as they expand their like the surface area of their bets.
Yeah, like the ones that I think are kind of interesting right now that I'm looking through is like this Trump and the Ukraine war in the first 90 days, 50% chance, 49% chance. Like stuff like that is kind of interesting. Like if that got a lot more liquid, that would be a very interesting market. And if there is signal in there somehow,
Yeah, now there's
it,
money on. I mean, yeah, it's kind of like on ending or continuing a war. Can you imagine if like there was millions of, like hundreds of millions of dollars on if this war will continue? Um,
yeah, but it's like you're talking on like the order of billions in magnitude. That's like hundreds of billions that is like influencing it rather than this is still pretty small. Obviously, it's like kind of crazy to be betting on that, but as like the kind of truth machine that you're talking about, that stuff is interesting to know, like kind of because there's like a big thing in Japan like during World War II. They had like pretty tight propaganda about like are they winning the war, are they losing the war, and like the first people to figure out were like the financial markets, right? Like that they're actually were losing the war, and um and like kind of like higher up elites and like started selling their kind of more speculative assets and investing in real assets, like stuff like that. Especially like it's a little different today with how communication happens, but a market is kind of like seeing through the truth of what may be like blasted on the news, right?
Yeah.
Along that same vein, you do have like indirect assassination markets. Like there's one where it's like, will Trump be inaugurated in in January? And it's like 96% yes, but that what is that delta? That's basically assassination.
Or he's old, he's 80, but yes,
Yeah.
it's him not being around or something crazy happening.
Interesting. That's a good point. All right, moving on. Is there anything I wanted to move on to just venture generally? Like, how do we think that changes with a Trump presidency? Is there anything else on the crypto front we wanted to touch on? Maybe because I agree with you that Bitcoin dominance is probably peaked here, unless you have the strategic reserve, and then I think Ethan, Sol both benefit. Sol probably more because the ETF is still ahead. and just it has PMF
Well,
and traction right now.
I think what we could see, which would be way more bullish than like more venture money, is more liquid funds, right? Because now you're going to have liquid tokens being a lot more interesting from like a fundamental basis. And so this could be the golden run for liquid for liquid
Who
crypto
tweeted
funds,
that art
right?
there from Defiant?
Maybe.
The
I mean,
golden age.
Arthur's been beating the liquid, and he hasn't really been wrong. There's been like a bunch of good liquid tokens this year. You can kind of get lost in looking at Bitcoin Dom because it's basically all against ETH, like market cap wise. So there have been for like good liquid funds some pretty, but yeah, I could see this just like, Bitcoin dominance dropping is good for like liquid funds because that's like kind of their whole game is to outperform Bitcoin and like to outperform ETH really too.
Yeah, I think we need more liquid money than venture money because like you're just funding all this stuff that doesn't like I think liquid rewards stuff that actually has like traction and users and like or attention, I guess like on the meme side. But talking about these liquid funds in particular, they usually like buying stuff that has a strong fundamental case. So I think you probably want more of that. That'll help create a more efficient market on the fundamental case side of things versus, ventures still funding a lot of speculative things and a lot of new things that need to be built out. So definitely, and it's not like that's not important. It's just like we've had such an overwhelming like amount of money in venture relative to liquid for the size of the markets that I think a move towards liquid is healthier for sure. We should talk a little bit about memes because I feel like that'll be debated now that regulations opening up.
Well, yeah, we
Yeah.
kind of did at the beginning of this. I think it's I think it's like mid IQ to say that memes are like dead now.
Yeah, I still think it's like I think why memes were kind of born out of this cycle were definitely a function of the regulation and then like the low float high FTV stuff. Um, but now that they're kind of here, I don't know if just because that improves, they're going away because people really love trading them and like the volatility on them and kind of like maybe the bigger societal trends of like people feeling financially, needing a big win essentially and wanting to chase stuff with higher volatility definitely all still exist. And I think like the cat's kind of out of the bag and I don't really see them slowing down as long as there's memes that are still like, pulling 10x's or 100x's, then I don't really see them slowing down either.
I mean, I also think you're probably just going to get more applications now built around memes, like infrastructure for memes and stuff, right? Like I know there's Pump and there's Moonshot and there's some other things, but like you're going to see way more in that. So yeah, I honestly, it's kind of just like as I said at the beginning of this, it feels like it's now fastest horse season, and so it's the Golden Bull, and it's kind of like you want to be on the fastest horse, and if your thing goes up less than another thing, you get angry. But yeah, I just don't see DeFi just like sucking all this meme coin liquidity. Maybe there's something new though that comes out that'll be cool and
Yeah.
they'll
Well,
do it.
what are some bear cases for the market right now? Because obviously, I think everyone on Twitter
I think
and
inflation reaccelerating and like interest rates
just like general
not coming down.
stocks not doing poorly or something.
Yeah. I mean, there's a chance that Trump has some pretty inflationary policies, right?
Yeah. So just general macro risk. Yeah. Because it was pretty depressing there for a bit where it was like just the regulation side looks so bleak. So that's lifted, which obviously we've seen
I
a
mean, it's
massive
also possible
repricing.
that Trump doesn't deliver on any of his promises. Like
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a rug.
politicians have done this before. Like this is kind of like the
Yeah, it just
politician
That would be
MO.
it really
such a
looks.
rug.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, if he's bringing all these people on board, then it's going to be much harder. Like what
The
would
other
he
thing
do? Just leave it a status quo?
Yeah, the other thing too is like think about this, okay? The Like if the Republicans come through on all their promises, there will be no reason if you're in crypto, you're going to vote for other things than whatever. And I'm not an American, okay? But if you're like a single issue voter and you voted for Trump because of crypto this cycle, and they follow through on all their promises, then what's going to convince you to go back and take the risk of going back to the other side, right? And so there is like a benefit for them for in the long term of like continuing to follow through on all this, because they can kind of like permanently, you know,
But
get a
where do you
bunch of
think crypto is on
support.
his priority list? You know, because
Well, they've
like
bought a
crypto is
lot of
everything
goodwill.
to us, but I imagine there's a lot of other,
But no, but he can
like
be pro crypto without doing anything besides stopping to do things, right?
Yeah, it
Like,
was kind of like the Elizabeth Warren thing where it's like, I'm putting together an anti-crypto army. It's like, why? Like, who actually who actually wants this? Other than like like obviously FTX, a lot of people got screwed over. And if there was more regulation on that, that could have helped.
that wasn't crypto though. That was just fraud.
Yeah, I
That was
know.
like a cent. Yeah.
So, but it's like, it's kind of like, what is the upside for him? Like, yeah, maybe he gets in there and doesn't do the reserve, which I think is the reserve's kind of absurd, um, and doesn't do like some insanely pro things. But I think it's definitely in their interest. Stable coins for like demand for the debt, and just not alienating this user base, having more donors.
I mean, definitely stablecoins. To play devil's advocate on the token stuff, though, there's like a lot of law, like regulations around how to do a public company, right? And many crypto projects are arguably just flaunting those, going public with much less transparency, like much less disclosures, much less oversight, and that's
Yeah,
definitely led to some bad results. And it's like,
for sure.
what crypto shows is there's like so much demand for this, right? Like there's so much demand for aping stuff beyond what the public markets are serving, that it does feel, and especially with the IPO window just like being closed for so long, it just seems like that needs to, if the regs don't change on going public, then crypto will continue to just serve this, like no matter what you do. But I'm curious, like how, what do you, yeah, what's the solution there, like?
Yeah, I think that the problem that the lawyers or like these projects have been saying is that there's just is no framework for how to do this properly. And maybe it does come in and it's like a lot more burdensome than it has been in the past, which like is definitely possible. But at least like people can build this technology and build these things with out being afraid of going to jail, or like with some certainty. I think just like the market really hates uncertainty. And then on your point about aping things, I think that's why like meme coins are so popular. It's just like people just want to buy stuff that can go up a lot, and that's like a more of a symptom of like cultural and economics.
yeah, I think if you read Matt Levine's column yesterday, it was pretty good. And there's basically two outcomes now from the Trump, if he really is to be like pro crypto. One of them is like actually creating new rules and papering new regulations and working with the industry, and that'll be good for like the long-term health of the industry. The number one reason why US markets are the best in the world is because they're like deemed as like safe. There's like fair rules, there's investor protections, and so that's why a lot of institutional capital comes in. And so that's like one, that's like the I would say that's the bigger bull case. And then the other one is like this hands-off approach where they just stop enforcements, don't make any new rules, and just kind of leave it be. And things will get like probably a bit crazy, prices will go up and stuff, people have fun, but it won't it probably won't gain like that institutional, those like big institutional flows, because it'll still kind of seem like a bit of a joke, I guess. So hopefully we get like some like good, thoughtful. Most people want just like new rules. It's not like we want no rules and just people to be able to like launch rugs and raise a lot of money for bullshit. So I think if we just get some like new thoughtful regulation, that would be the best kind of like outcome.
Yeah, I think both paths are BTC goes up. One in the one where there's less constructive regulation and or just less interesting stuff getting built, then BTC Dom is going to be a lot higher than it would be otherwise in a world where there's good regulation, which leads to interesting apps and kind of a longer tail of stuff. But
Yeah. The good regulation, putting like the TradFi stuff on chain, like the tokenization of like private equity funds, venture funds, stocks on chain, like that, I think is where you actually have like, obviously there's going to be a lot more regulation with that than it currently exists. But that's where like, everything, that's like the whole vision, like everything happens on chain, finance happens on chain. Like that's the true super cycle for crypto. And it's like, is there liquid tokens or venture bets that you can get exposure to that right now? It's kind of hard to know, but definitely I think a massive positive for the space, just bringing that legitimacy and capital onto these rails, even if it's like, gated with KYC or stuff like that.
yeah, but hard to see a world where memes don't do well in all of this.
Especially in the next couple years. Yeah, it's just like people don't have a lot of money and they want to hit it big on things, and like not even, they don't even have money, even if you do have money, like if anyone sees something going up 10x or 100x, everyone's interested in participating.
I just think if you could buy like OpenAI or like Databricks or Anthropic or some of these things on chain, like if you have crypto AI projects that have that level of narrative, like something like Nous Research, which is sort of a legit, like, state of the art AI lab, and we find good ways to tokenize these things in a way where you're confident you have exposure to the upside. I think those things will like eclipse memes just because of the capital they can
I
attract.
don't think they're the same. They're tapping into, like, there's definitely some overlap in capital, but not really, right? Like memes, you break out into the people playing the scratch off pump fun early stage stuff, and then the larger ones that are listed that people trade as market beta. And then this, I think, would be its own bucket where it would bring on a lot of capital and maybe shift away some of the more fundamentally investors. But I don't necessarily know that there's going to be that much cannibalization of meme demand with that. I think it is just going to be a decent amount of new money. I'm not saying zero, but I don't think it's going to be enough to kind of slow down the demand for the memes too much.
Yeah, I agree with that. I wanted to we have like a few minutes. I'm actually curious. We've never kind of done this, but like, when do you guys think BTC hits 100K now?
Yeah, that, and also I'd love to hear how everyone's positioned. Like, what are your biggest bags right now, and like, what are you positioned? All right, 100K. I think Q2 2025 or Q1 2025. Let's say.
I think before end of year.
Ooh.
Really?
Yeah.
Damn. We know how Jan's positioned.
I think probably like sometime in 2025. If we were to have it before end of year, that would, like, things would get really crazy.
The setup is there.
Yeah, I want to say before end of the year. It's just like there's what, a month, 2 months, maybe
Yeah, it's so
Santa Claus
soon.
rally, pump it 50%. I'm actually gonna say like Q3, which is a bit delayed, I guess. But yeah,
Yeah. I just think like the tax cuts are nice, right? But I think the one boon that we haven't had in our lifetimes has been deregulation, and that is so massive in terms of like GDP growth across so many industries. Even like housing costs, like a third of housing costs is permits and time and all this other bullshit.
Really, a third?
Yeah, it's like it's something gross, and so I think like that. There's a world where that gets priced in before the end of the year, and then you just, if you look historically, anytime there's been a really good first 3 quarters, last quarter is really good. There's typically a lot of chasing that happens, and so I think we have a really strong end of year, and you can, yeah, there's a chance where we get it.
Yeah.
'Cause I don't think it's like the fact that you have a red sweep is priced in at all.
So am I the most bearish one here? I just said sometime in 2025.
that's not even an answer. That's just like you don't want to give an answer.
Well, yeah, in the year 2025. Wait, I have to give a quarter? I have to be quarter specific?
No, it's fine. How are you positioned?
Well, I definitely sold some stuff, and I talked about that
Yeah,
before,
you
like
de-risked.
going into the election, because I thought that if Kamala, like, basically we'd have the opposite candle of what we've had, right? Like if Trump was priced in at over 50%, and then we had this on the back of his win, and maybe we had some extra juice because of the full sweep, but you would have like something similar in the other direction, and then like a lot less positive outlook on where regulation is. So I thought that the risk was more to the downside. But now that it looks like, barring anything crazy, he's going to be in and regulation is going to open up, where I've had the most success, as Jose says, the gem hunter is is searching for these kind of smaller projects. And so now that this is just like, 4 years plus of like fertile ground for these smaller projects. And, although majors ripped right off the bat, you typically see this, delay in the smaller projects and the alts that
So you're cashed up, or you
I'm
have
like,
no majors?
I'm 25% cash, maybe 30% cash. I was like 31, 32, like probably 33% cash before the election, then got rebalanced down to whatever, like low or high 20s. Yeah, no majors, all in like different projects I think are cool. Actually, something I'm doing on my Twitter, which I just funded an account a few days ago with 100K USDC. I'm going to be trying to run it up. I'm going to post like some videos and some like weekly updates on that. So that'll be soon at
You
Flick
doing like
Capital on
active trading
Twitter.
on that?
Not
What
active.
are your top three biggest positions then, other than cash?
But Banana Gun is the biggest one. Then I have a lot of Synapse. Probably too much Synapse. But and then also I had a pretty big position in gold miners. But then the rest of them I have like a ton of different things that
Well,
you'll
why
have
are
to
the gold
come and
miners, by the way?
see.
When I charted them, they didn't seem to outperform gold. That I sent you that like trading. They just
Yeah,
don't seem to
it's like
outperform gold
Bitcoin
that
miners
much.
like don't outperform gold or don't outperform Bitcoin over the long run, but like there's can be pockets where Bitcoin's ripping where they
Okay,
have like insane outperformance.
okay, but
So that's
gold
kind
has
of
been
what
ripping.
I'm
Why
seeing.
haven't they been ripping? You think?
Well, they were doing really well, and then the biggest miner in the index, Newmont, like had terrible earnings. It went down 13% in one day last
Damn.
week. So
All right,
yeah.
all right. Yeah, and how are you positioned?
Yeah, I'm like before into election, I got like 1.5 times long.
That's very long.
Just long BTC Sol memes in terms of like perps, and then I have spot positions across certain less liquid ones that are like longer term plays. Um, but yeah, just kind of kept it simple with the fastest horses.
What are your BTC Sol and then memes? What are your biggest
Uh,
memes?
I got with Popcat. I should have probably scooped some Pepe instead of ETH in hindsight. Like same bet, better horse. But yeah, mostly those, and I picked up some bonk. It kind of seems like they're going on listing sprees.
All right, interesting. So you don't have any utility coins other than your
Athena, of course.
okay,
Yeah,
makes sense.
that's my biggest utility coin bag.
Yeah, Ceteris, what's your
I mostly have majors for the most point, but like Sol, I'm still overweight. Sol, because I think like while ETH BTC probably bottomed, I think the still think Sol ETH just goes up. So like Sol BTC ETH SWI. I like SWI. That's like my alt L1. Um, and then outside of that, it's like I like Goat, and Meta has always been. I don't know if the Meta is considered like utility. I've just like always been bullish on MetaDAO guys, but it's mostly just like I just like majors and like farming and stuff. I don't trade perps or anything.
Yeah,
did
I
you get
think
so you did not get long for the election?
I mean, I'm like 100%. I don't own stable coins,
Okay,
so
nice.
like I think like here Meta is a good example of something where I sold some
the problem it's
around
just
this
like the
price.
liquidity on it is very bad. That's like
Yeah. Like I don't necessarily think this is a good price or bad price. I sold some recently So, but for example, just to like kind of highlight the point that I was making, it's like, November 4th, it was $2,900, and right now it's trading at 3,000, and it's like pretty low. So it's up like, not that much, and it's pretty low liquidity. So obviously, like the price jumps around a lot, but these are like the smaller type of plays that are, let's say, like, sub couple hundred million market cap that, if you believe in them and have a fundamental case, they don't always like the really liquid stuff that's like known market beta is the stuff that's going to rip, on the Trump victory. And the less liquid stuff that, requires more diligence to understand and get bullish on, and where there's like, really like possible returns like multiple times
Yeah,
returns.
you also have a way bigger risk of getting like stuck with stuff like that, right?
Yeah, but
Like,
it's just like you have more time to react. It's like, okay, you have this favorable regulation come in, and it looks like it's going to be a really good environment for the next 4 years. Not everything in the market can reprice to that in 24 hours or in real time as it's happening, right? So like there's a lot of opportunity to go across these kind of smaller projects and look for stuff that's, the fundamental this stuff is gonna, or like the election results are gonna like massively improve their fundamentals, or just crypto going up in general is gonna massively improve their fundamentals, and like take positions, especially like if you're, retail investor not trading like crazy size. Like there's a lot of time to kind of look for that, versus like all the really big names that are correlated to the market are all gonna rip. And it's like, yeah, if you miss the move on the election, then how much juice is there left there. It's kind of like more dependent on the market, where you can kind of get these smaller ones that move not necessarily in line with the market, and have some delay and some opportunity.
Nice. Myself, yeah, I have majors.
I'm gonna guess that you're
A
just
lot of.
like mostly ETH and Athena.
I have actually Sol is my biggest notional position, but then ETH's the second biggest, sadly. And then Ina, and memes like, and I have Meta and Banana Gun as well, but it's just hard to buy those, and yeah, hard to buy a reasonable amount of those. And then memes, but I'm
What do you
not
mean it's hard to
probably
buy a
5 to
reasonable amount
10%
of
memes.
banana?
No, I mean mainly Meta. To be fair,
Yeah, my
Meta
biggest
is really
spot
annoying to buy.
bags are banana and rollbit.
Oh,
Very
interesting.
nice. So all
I
four
have
of
some
us own
Robit too,
banana gun.
but
That's
no longer a
interesting.
big
No, I don't
position.
have banana gun.
Oh, you sold yours?
A long
You
time
sold-
ago. For a mistake, I lost all the money I sold it for.
Okay.
What'd you
Well,
put it in?
Front tech.
Oh, nice.
Oh
Yeah, that was a fun
no.
loss.
That was like that was the fastest I've ever evaporated money, I
Same.
think.
Yeah,
It's straight down as well. Like there was never
There was
there wasn't a
nothing.
single relief pump.
Foden
It was
vibes.
just
Yeah, there's
yeah.
nothing to do.
Uh,
All right, I think that was
Nice.
I
that
don't
was
know.
good.
We're over an hour now. Want to maybe
Yeah.
wrap it?
Yeah. Thanks very much for tuning in, guys, and we'll catch you again in 2 weeks, where hopefully Bitcoin will be nearing 100K for it to believe
Yep.
Jan.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Let's
See
say
ya.
everyone.